Hello, my name is Brant Hunt, and my channel is Discerning What is True. I'm sharing this live tonight from YouTube. My channel again, Discerning What is True. Then also on Odyssey, and then also on Facebook. And so tonight's title is "The Great Pan is Dead," Chapter 15. That is of the Shadow of the Third Century by Alvin Kuhn. So we're going to get into this particular work tonight. Thank you for being here. I hope that you enjoy what I'm sharing here from what I call basically an esoteric writer, uh, Mr. Kuhn himself. So again, the title is Chapter 15, A Great Pan is Dead. The exegesis of the study demands that notice be taken of that great cry that has gone up in Christian books in their exaltation over the displacement of the ancient pagan religions by Christianity. Great Pan is dead. In capital letters here. It is supposed to imply that the end of paganism and the beginning of a new world era of sane and rational human understanding has been brought to pass under the benign influence of Christian truth. And its underlying implications, the cry swelling out over the world with the death of naturalism and the advent of a supernatural or divine age for humanity, is supposed to announce the end of a period, as it were, of the world's infancy, in which it had naively believed that nature was the God that ruled the universe under the natural law, with no place for the interposition of the benevolent will of divine intelligence to effect its personal work of paternal love. Pantheism predicated, that is, the presence of God in all things, and thus drew the mind of man outward to reckon with him in all his works. Opponents argued it was to demean the supreme by making him co-equal in stature with his creation. God was no greater than his works. God was, in fact, his world, which carried his full expression and was the garment of his being. The ancient man could worship God without lifting his eyes above the earth, its grass and trees, for nature was the living manifestation of God, embodying his life and energies. God was resident in every oak, pine, flower, bush, hill, spring, and vale, even in the sunshine and the rain. The pagan needed to look no further off than the visible world of earth, sea, and sky, for God was omnipresent in all these. Therefore, there was no spirituality, no metaphysical conceptuality in the pagan system. Paganism, worshiping Pan as its god, worshiping the material universe. With the coming of the divine babe in Bethlehem, a new era of human conception was ushered in. So Christianity has asserted. It would be interesting. I'm going to say this. Here's a good question. Maybe someone out there maybe can answer this. Maybe we'll talk about this with Bill Langdon. It would be interesting what time period where the stars were took place during the time of Christianity starting. I also wonder, with not only that, but also the time setting um, of the Council of Nicaea. It would be interesting. I think that was 325 AD or 320 or 315. I get them confused sometimes. I think it's 325. Be interesting to know what times they started. That would kind of be interesting also. The advent of Jesus and the spread of the new dispensation heralded by him changed the whole mode, and frame of human thinking. It shifted the focus of mankind's interest and reliance from the God in an external nature to the supreme God in the Holy of Holies of spiritual realization. It destroyed at last the superstitious beliefs in the existence of Nadia, Aureas, Dryas, Nereidis, giants, argo, demons, heroes, dragons, serpents, and such creation of pagan fancy and delusion, whose whimsities had to be placated by offerings and eccentric rites, and substituted for them the rule of divine Father, whose will was the moral and spiritual law, motivated by cosmic beneficence. But the law of nature administered by the presiding general of the woods and mountains, Christianity substituted the rulership of divine love. The governments of life passed from the hands of the nature gods into those of the God of all, with a mind that could understand man's problems, a heart that could sympathize with him in his tragedy moments, and finally a love that could enfold him in unremitting providential care. In his in here is a quote here in the language of Millman, that is in the book called History, page 33. There's a quote here saying, "The mental childhood of the human race was passing away. At last, it had become weary of its old toys." End quote. End quote. Before engaging its dissertation on this remarkable pronouncement, it will be well to present the larger picture that Millman paints of the momentous junction of affairs at this age of the world's life. He portrays the pagan religions on their popular side as having run into a dead-end street. The masses had been overfed on the myths and allegories of the gods and finally have found this preventer nothing but husks and empty shells. Nature went on in her invariable course, turning neither right nor left to lend a ear to man's prayers and special pleadings, solicitations, or offerings. The old faiths were weakening. The edifice was crumbling, and Millman asked what remained for minds enlightened beyond the poetic faith of their ancestors, yet not ripe for philosophy. How was the cravings for religious incitement to be appeased when minds had turned with dissatisfaction, faction, or disgust from the old accustomed nutriment? Here, he says, quote, is the secret of the remarkable union between the highest reason and the most abject superstition, which characterized the age of imperial Rome, end quote. The turning away from old lifeless forms opened the way for the entry of all sorts of new religious adventures. Rome opened its arms to Judaism, Pyrrhon, Isis, Seraphia, Mitroc, Neoplatonic, and Pythagorean cults. Anything that was imposing or secret or unique or mystic was welcome. Through the very multitudes and variety of these cults, rendered the general mind after a time indifferent to or paled by their presentations. Astrology, witchcraft, he averts, led captive many minds which boasted their emancipation from the popular tyranny of the old faith in the gods and nature's spirit. The venerable oracles were silent, but the voices of astrologers and soothsayers were voluble, dispensing the secrets of fertility for inquisitism minds and a compensation. Pompey, Chrysler, and Caesar all consulted the Chaldeans to be told what the planets revealed of their fortunes. These hawkers of prophetic knowledge were driven out by the exhortations of the state officials, but returned and favored by popular support, defiled the authorities. The death of the god, that is Pan, was thus followed by a burgeoning forth of a whole scale of religious or semi-religious superstitions before the air was magically charged and cleared by the coming of the gospel of the incarnate love in the person of Jesus of Nazareth. The interim of transition from dead pagan nature fideism over to the full enlightenment of a historical sized Christology was filled with astrological superstition, and mantric divination of many kinds. With the propagation of Christianity would come the master light of heavenly philosophy and a divine revelation buttress, as never before in all the life of mankind, but an epiphany of actual deified power in person. This last stage would complete the historical process of ending the world's childhood and inaugurating it into its puberty and final adulthood development as the one sole religion of eternal truth crowned the cycle of growth of the whole human race. Great Pan was dead. The babe of Bethlehem had displaced him on the throne of the world. So proclaim the voices of Christian oracles, and so believe the trusting devotees of the faith. But a searching critique discloses that every aspect and item of this legend is both analytically fallacy and factually untrue, or if it is at points chances to coincide with data, it still is conceived in a warped and unsound rationale, as had been imitated as a earlier place herein. Yet great Pan at last was dead. He had been suffered to the language and died through the failure of human understanding and balanced wisdom. The instinctive human faith that nature administers the laws of beneficence, with which it is man's duty to harmonize his life in a beautiful accord, was destroyed by the gradual recession of esoteric interest and dimming of esoteric insight, preparing the ground for the implanting of the idea of a personal savior. See, that idea was never, in our, as far as we know, has never been considered until this point. Okay, so why would God do that? What was wrong with what was before? You see, did God change his plan here and say, I've got to back up and punt here and do something different? Is that what's going on here? Or was it something else that was far more devious to to lead man in the wrong direction? This question I'm asking here. Pan was dead, and thus died with him the priceless knowledge of the necessities of man, coordination of his life with that of nature. Pan was dead, and no longer would the Mediterranean civilization stand with its feet on solid reality. Pan was dead, and the mind of Western humanity was laid open to the sweep of every wild, mystical, and emotional excess that can overflow it when its emphasis of critical judgment, based ultimately on nature's law, are toppled by irrational templates. Pan was slain, and buried with him for dreary ages laid the ancient science of nature's symbolism. The final reliance of all human thinking and one true guide in this criterion of truth. Gone was Pan, and gone with him the master knowledge that all perfection can be won only through the intermarrying of the two elements of man's constitution within him, the spirit and the natural. And flown with him too was the knowledge that nature knowledge that nature in the mirror of all truth, since she reflects in her modes and processes the very mind of God. Gone with the Sylvian deity was the one anchorage provided by omniscience, by which alone man can tie his life and his mind to the level of balance between the two worlds of subjectively and objectively, on the sharp boundary between which his evolution must proceed. Gone was Pan, and with his disappearance went the hope of any chance to realize more than a modium of psychological benefit from even the false beliefs that a savior, Messiah, had come. Gone was Pan, and with him vanished every possibility of normal evolution of the human genius for 2,000 years. For the councils of folly that rushed to take charge in his place decreed that the last word of universal truth had been uttered once and for all by untutored Galilean peasants. A Galilean peasant. And that therefore the need of all further thinking was ended with that usurpation of the thought power of the Western area by upstart presumption. Man's greatest birthright in his existence, his power to search the world and his own soul for the living founts of truth, was abrogated at one stroke by the most monstrous tyranny that ever clamped his iron clutch upon the life of the race. He was forbidden to think. Swept away from him for ages was all the prerogative which is by his virtue of his incarnation on earth, to reflect upon the world without and his experience with it, and let his mind report the wealth of understanding that it accrues to him for the adventure. And gone with great Pan also was that the intelligent conception of the nature and function of matter, which had until the age of Christian degeneracy still steadied the philosophies of the wise men in intellectual pose that intermessurably sweetened the daily tasks of life for the creative creature man. The history of the despolitician of human sanity and happiness by the persistent vogue of the doctrine of the essential evil nature of matter in religious conception is yet to be adequately written. Its horrendous results is the devastation of human will are beyond tabulations. It has spread its blighting shadow across the minds and deadened the happiness of millions. Had great Pan had not been dethroned and outcast, never could that plague of idiotic delusion about the sinful nature of the human body and its procreative powers, which felt like a bright light, I should say, upon the conscience of Christian populations and sickened all the existence of soul and body for close to 10 centuries, have gained its fearsome power to warp natural instinct into a nauseated morbidity. Yes, great Pan was dead, and human delight was dead with it. A miasma of sin/sin sense settled down upon the imagination of the Western millions, striking dead with its pestilence thought dash poisoned every wholesome impulse of natural man. Matter was evil, the body inundated, bound in sin, to give it to his pleasure would drag the spirit pure soul down into hell. The flesh, with its goats, and temptations, must be mortified and crucified. The only merit was in crushing down its appetites. The saint was he who tortured his body most hideously. Pan was dead, but he was dead only in the diseased mind of hallucinated simpletons. He could still assert his kingship in minds unaffected by psychopathic disorders. And he could also hide his time in exile, knowing that his day of return and triumph would come. And in the 14th century, it came. His restoration came with the Renaissance of Italy, which foreshadowed the Reformation in Germany and the North. His real reed pipes were heard once again in rustic dales and leafy bowers, I should say, as the ostracized human spirit released itself to partake of delight in nature's largeness of beauty without the haunt of a morbid consciousness of sin. And poetry, art, romance, love, and beauty would once more lift mortal sense to heights of sweetness and purity. And perhaps Pan could be laughing his satire windily in anticipation of the day, now realized in the giddy whirl of the cycles when his power, scorned and vilified by priestly curse and philosophical stigma, could be demonstrated in such fearful fashion as to send his traducers, the pious religiousists, reeling from the impact of the discovery of how to release his terrible swift sword of secret might buried in the atom of his despised matter. Great Pan dead. Yes, dead to those whose native powers of perception and understanding had been killed by outrageous parody of supposed knowledge, dead to a world in which the genius of divine light, struggling to shine in the darkness of unintelligent moronism, had been quenched by fear and madness. Dead to a world that through the feebleness of human Elon had stifled the wisdom that would have united Pan in blessed union with the rising vigor and sweet grace of this divine spirit growing in mankind. But Pan was dead, thus only to that segment of the collective mind that had succumbed to blind obsession of error. He was dead only for the world that with consummate folly had rebelled against his sovereignty and denied his beneficencies. To them, his death was a tragedy of loss, of befuddlement of de-rationalization, that is, and every century of his prolonged exile from his rightful place and office in human life and thought was an added century of a corroding canker at the core of human blessedness. And at the end of the abysmal night of the Christian Dark Ages is heralded by the rising dawn of returning human sanity. Perhaps the Heresosat may again deign to haunt the arches of the wood and bring the sunlight of natural joy back into the sin-darkened chambers of the deluded religious consciousness. It is necessary in this connection to deal with the repeated exhortations of most publicists that Christianity came in by natural movement of the mind of the age to supply a void in the religious life of the Roman world population, produced by the failure and decay of the old pagan culturalism. It is generally argued that the new religion took hold because of the natural death of a religion that had been long imposed on a submissive world, and then at last proved its insufficiency and left the people groping in an empty dust, I should say. It is not in purview of our understanding to quarrel much with with these broad hypotheses adduced to explain the state of things 2,000 years ago. Our essay is not a brief for pagan philosophy, but an effort to grasp and delineate the situation so that the world had the truth of it instead of a wretched half-truth and outright falsely. It is not likely ever to fall within our purpose to vindicate any popular form of religion, for the excellent reason that popular religion is almost always, and in all its manifestations, a conglomerate of gross error and false conceptions, or at the best, true doctrines, atrocities warped into weird distortions. True religions are never the upgrowth of popular movements. They do not spring from the common soil. They are gifts of supreme truth and wisdom from evolved overlords of evolution that are handed down from the heights of vision and understanding, and are inevitably soiled, damaged, and torn in pieces by the incompetent beneficiaries. And I'm going to stop here tonight. I'm going to go too long. It's probably about 30 minutes here. Not quite. 21 minutes. I want to make it short. I wanted to get through this tonight. This is a little tired too. So I wanted to just basically share a little bit more of this particular book. And so anyway, thank you for being here. Hope that you have ears to hear and eyes to see. And may your heart hear truth itself. And thank you for listening. Again, this is the chapter 15 called is The Great Pan is Dead, chapter 15. This is from the book called The Shadow of the Third Century by Alvin Kuhn. Wish you a good night, and you take care, and we'll talk soon.